Okay, ladies, now each one of you has a personal story of how you actually came to be where you are today. So can each of you give the audience a brief insight into how you arrived at your current roles? And I'm actually going to start with you, Phyllis.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. It's good to be here. Great to see so many women in the audience. I started pretty humble beginnings. I grew up in West Texas near Midland, Odessa, out in the middle of the Permian Basin, which we all hear so much about today. And just from a young age was very driven to work. I loved working, and my father instilled that work ethic and expected that I would go to college. He didn't have that opportunity. So I did, and I went on to get my accounting degree and become a CPA. So I worked here in Houston when I started, it was Ernst & Winnie. It was Ernst & Young when I left. But that was a great environment. I would say that the accounting industry was a leader in diversity and hiring women, even back in 1985. And I had a diverse group. And there were no real perceived barriers inside that industry. And I think that really helped me moving forward. But I decided I wanted to live a little closer to home because I was making a 50-mile commute and went to work for a local accounting firm and had the opportunity to audit Port Freeport for 4 years. Made the decision to start a family, and about the time that my daughter was born, the position of Director of Finance and Administration became open. And I applied for the position, and there were a lot of positives: raising a family, fewer working hours, had a leadership role. But it was for a governmental body with an elected board of oversight. And so that was my only concern in taking on that role. But I made the decision to move forward, and it was a great one because I had immediately had the opportunity to get engaged in all aspects of the maritime industry and in running a port. And it ultimately led to the position that I have today with the mentorship of many people in the maritime industry. So really enjoy what I do, and I still feel like I'm learning and continuing to rise in the role as a CEO.
Thank you.
Yes.
How about you, Diane?
Sure, I like what you said about rising, and that I feel like this should be called the process of rising, because I think, and Dr. Simmons should have gone after us, because that was such a motivational talk.
It was.
But I feel, humbled to be on this panel, humbled to be here with you. I do think that, Dr. Simmons, Susan Dio, and Cindy Yielding, a VP, could very easily be on this panel and tell you things that they learned at the top. And so what I hope to do is share some lessons learned of rising. And so, something I think more relevant today in careers is, who here has encountered a setback? Okay, so I hope that did your setback turn into a setup for something positive? Looking back, would you say that?
Yes.
Okay, so when you're going through that, it doesn't always feel like it's a setup. But if you have that mindset and you have that, okay, something is happening here, how can I learn from this? How can I learn from this failure? How can I learn from this change? And for me, my biggest change was, in going from active duty to reserves. I was going to do that full time. My husband and I had been apart for about 3.5 years at that point with our young son. And I went to swear in on the scroll, and I wasn't on the scroll because I was permanently medically disqualified from a skydiving incident. And so that just devastated me because that was, all I wanted to do was serve. My father and mother instilled that in me. And, I had to learn something else. And I was, so disabled that I skied for 100 days that winter. I'm kidding. But I did ski, and so that made me choose new paths. So I say just the one thing is that your setback may be a setup, and we are excited to share some of those lessons today, and hopefully collectively reach up to the bio that Dr. Simmons has presented before us.
Yes. Very good. Thank you so much. Erin, what about you?
Sure. I always knew I wanted to be in healthcare, so I thought I'm going to be a nurse. And it turns out it's hard to be a nurse when you pass out every time blood is drawn. And so I knew I was likely going to have to find another place in that healthcare continuum where I could impact care on a larger level. And so I actually started out with a degree in health information management, doing coding and really that kind of Wizard of Oz behind the scenes things that happen once a chart is closed and your patients leave the hospital. And it led me into internal audit and then eventually through quality and regulatory, which is how I've been so blessed to serve in this role today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, next. Our theme today is first in field, first on top. Dr. Simmons shared a wonderful story, and I love the stories about school especially, and we were so inspired by that. So for the panel, let's talk about obstacles, and Diane, you kind of alluded to that, that we would address that. So, you know, we talk about, okay, the glass is half full, okay, what was interesting, or we could say, okay, what were obstacles? But what were things that were unique or obstacles for you that you were able to overcome to get where you are today? And let's start, Diane, let's start with you.
Sure. So as far as obstacles, I think some of that goes back to your viewpoint of, okay, is this an obstacle? Is this a challenge? I prefer the word challenge because I'm competitive, and I'm mostly competitive against myself. And so I want to reach my full potential. And I like to survey the audience. Who here thinks that they're living at their full potential? Other than Dr. Simmons. Is anyone, is anyone here living, can honestly or candidly say you're living your full potential? I'm not. And so, you know, for me, when I look at these things, okay, how can we overcome this challenge? And not just, what do I do? It's how can I overcome that? Right. And then find that next step to get there. And so we've heard that example from Dr. Simmons right before us. And I didn't finish my PhD, so I'm not in the club. But one day, hopefully I will. And so I'll just say that it really goes to a mindset. I did not think that years ago, 15 years ago, I wanted to be a pilot in the Air Force, and that didn't happen. And then I wanted to do other things. And so I would not have predicted I would be where I am right now, but that's not a bad thing. And I'm an engineer, I'm a UAV operator, I'm a pilot. And I've told this joke before, how do you learn if someone's a pilot? They'll tell you. So you can insert Texan or other things in there as well. But I will just say a lot of it goes to your mindset and then how you respond to that. And I know we're going to talk about advice later, but I would say it is not a sign of weakness to ask for help. It is a sign of strength. And I've learned that the hard way. And I don't know if any of you in the audience can relate, but find those people that will surround you and empower you and take that next step towards action.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay. A lot of the obstacles I think women create for themselves. And maybe not just women, all people, because sometimes we allow anxiety or fear of what's in front of us to hold us back. We make the decision instead of giving ourselves the opportunity to work through the challenge. And I found that, and I still do at times. There are things that test my confidence in my ability because some of these things feel larger than I'm able to achieve. But just remember, we didn't get here in our roles by working alone. We worked with a team of people and bringing together collective ideas and working through those challenges together is how we succeed. And communication, use your communication skills, enhance those, because that's the solution to a lot of things that you will perceive as obstacles. And I continue to advocate for women in roles where I have the opportunity to work with, with men. In the industry that I've been in, it has been largely men. And so there have been many opportunities, but even of recent, in just executive level arrangements, talking to individuals and working through how women and men communicate differently and how everybody needs to learn to work to exchange ideas in an effective manner around the table is very helpful. There are behaviors that people don't realize that they're using and can restrict us from exchanging really important information, and women have a lot to offer at the table. So I encourage you to continue to work through those challenges.
Can I add one thing to that real fast?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we were talking during the lunch, and one of the things we talked about was fear and anxiety and overcoming that. And so next time you encounter fear, I invite you to channel that fear into excitement and to channel that fear into action.
Right. And
so I hope it compels you to action. And man or woman, how many men do we have here? I am curious of that. Mm-hmm. Nice. So man or nice. That's for closing. I think man or woman, you have to break your own glass ceiling. Mm-hmm. So you have to do that first, and then you can help others. So I just wanted to add that very briefly.
Thank you. Erin.
Yeah, I would say the biggest obstacles probably in my career so far have been, I've historically been a younger executive, and that creates its own biases, I believe, with other individuals at the table, particularly very tenured, very seasoned experts in your field. And so sometimes I've felt like those biases have even impacted me where maybe I didn't speak up, maybe I didn't say something when I knew I could have. And the other issue is really about advocating for yourself. And one of those the example I have for that is I'm not a nurse. And so you can imagine every job interview I've ever had in quality and patient safety, what's the first question I get? How are you going to do this job without having been a bedside clinician? And that's fair, that's a fair question, but I've spent a lot of nights preparing that answer and perfecting that answer so that I can communicate and advocate for myself about why I can do this job without checking a very specific box on a resume.
Very good. Thank you. So today is International Women's Day, and traditionally International Women's Day celebrates the social, economic, cultural, and political achievements of women. It also marks a call to action for accelerating gender parity. So Rise to the Top is an event that also recognizes the steps that Houston women have taken to succeed. So the 2020 Women on Boards nonprofit set a goal for corporations to have at least 20% of their board constituting women. I'm excited to say that the Greater Houston Partnership announced its new board for 2019, and 20% is composed of females. So that said, now you have a few different experiences because the board of the organization you work with is different than, let's say, HCA. But in general, what are other strides that you believe corporations, whether it's your own or others, or nonprofits, should be instituting to support equality for women? I'm going to start with you, Phyllis.
Well, again, I believe mentoring is such an important part of that. I mean, we've seen more women being elected to school boards and city councils and places that they really feel that they can contribute to the quality of life and the quality of education that the children are getting. But women have more to offer beyond that. They're smart, they are business-minded, they're solution-oriented, and I think we just need to continue to help groom young women for those opportunities. And they should know that they have those opportunities. So I would encourage more mentorship programs and encouragement by others that are on boards to develop those young women.
Very good, thank you. What about you, Erin?
Sure. One of the things that we talk about extensively at HCA Houston Healthcare is look around at your community. What does your community look like? And then working very diligently to make sure that's what your boards look like. Do you have higher rates of women or minorities in your community? That's what your board needs to look like to help direct the care that you provide in your communities. And I think it's critical to tie in what does your community look like and how does your board reflect that?
Very good, thank you.
And I think what we were talking about earlier is, what are the next steps to improve those numbers? And we were talking about that a little bit before. And what I would add is, who here is either serving on a board or has served on a board? Okay, for those of you that did not raise your hand, that's who you want to talk to about serving on boards. So I would say that's step one. Step two, I didn't start serving on either boards or advisory boards until probably 3 years ago. And then you all have your first board of some sense, whether it's advisory or a formal board. And for mine, they're more they're technical because that's what I'm supporting. So 3D Robotics, I'm supporting on their board. Energy Drone Coalition, that's what I do for a living. It makes sense. I'm about to start a ASME, Unmanned Systems, council. And so if your board either does not have women and you want to have women, and they may not meet the board standards or requirements, then start a council. And so start a council that they can contribute to, and not just women, but diversity of thought. And as Dr. Simmons said, different approaches add value. And I very much agree with that, and I type that in my phone because we have to live that way. And so again, people who have served on boards or serving on boards, raise your hand. Look around, that's who you want to talk to, and next action steps, we want to work together towards those collective goals.
What I've found is that the best way is to start with nonprofit and ultimately do the work. If you do the work, they'll ask you to come back, they'll ask you to take more leadership positions, and that then is a great parlay into other types of boards. So this is what I found. Okay, last year, this is for you, Diane. Okay, so last year the partnership hosted its first diversity and inclusivity event called Houston Next, and an ERG Summit. Women's issues were paramount. So one of the key takeaways included the fact that only 1/3 of women are represented in computer and mathematical occupations among the 50 largest metros. So what can we do as a society to better these statistics and help our women pursue careers in STEM?
Sure. I know we have a 20-minute panel, but I'll give a very short overview, and I'm happy to speak to those interested after. And so I think we have the examples in this audience of who those individuals are, and we certainly have that, at the head table. And one thing that we do, and our company has done, is we've supported STEM initiatives with companies much larger than ours. And so at my table, BP is represented, and BP has been a partner of ours for the last 4 years in STEM efforts. So we started a drone camp at Rice University, a week-long free camp focused on underserved youth to inspire and empower the 6th through 8th graders we work with. We've held that several years. We took that initiative free to children in military families. And so I'm a Latina, so I try and support in groups that I can relate to. And so young women, underserved youth, and then children in military families. And I also started what's called Autonomy, or the Autonomy Foundation, and it's spelled ME for human-centered AI, digital ethics, and then STEM empowerment. And so I'm trying to take those next steps of, here's how we can impact. And so we're partnering with, companies such as BP. We're working with other companies. I'm an advisor at Yale, and we supported a K through 12 outreach program there. How many of your companies have a STEM outreach program? If you can't tell, I like to ask questions. Okay. For those of you that do not, how many of you want to have some sort of outreach program? Okay. So I invite you to take that next step towards action. And if we really want to build that pipeline of scientists, technologists, engineers, we have to engage them and we have to empower them. And they have some of the most brilliant ideas, things that we would never think of. And when you look at constraints, size, weight, power, cost, they view this from a clean landscape. Well, if it weighs more, just give more power. Well, it takes more money. Well, let's give him more money. And so, I love how they think differently. And I would just call you to action with that. And one thing we're excited about, in April 30th, we're going to have an event with 500 young women with Dow DuPont in the greater Houston area. So I invite you to start things like that, be partnered with those who are doing it. And if you're interested in that, I'm happy to talk to you after.
Phyllis, your company has a program, right?
Well, we don't have a program, but we're very supportive of programs in our school district that really get children and youth engaged in areas that require your STEM education. And for example, I'll cite here in Houston, there are maritime education programs that are in many of the schools, Yates and others, which is really positive and creates a sense of opportunity there for the maritime side. There are also rocketry programs that are in our high schools. Brazos Wood High School had a great success with that in the last year, and they were successful under the leadership of a young lady, a senior, with 30 students in this group. They developed a rocket that was, the design was approved by NASA, and then they were granted the opportunity to go to White Sands, New Mexico to launch the rocket. It was a 20-foot long rocket that was designed to reach up to heights of 100,000 feet. They made it to 30,000. They had the highest launch of anyone that day, and was higher than many of the colleges that were launching in the area. So it was a great success, but those are the things that get the students excited, and they don't actually, and they can see their skills being put to work, what they're learning in the classroom, that hard work in the classroom being applied, and I think that's what's important. They don't always get to see how we apply it, and finding more ways to do that, get them engaged, and that brought in companies, executives, and others to help make that successful. And it's fantastic, and so many of those students are going on to continue that STEM education at the college level. So we need to do more of that and give children more opportunity to witness the STEM education at work, because it's very diverse.
Thank you. I've got a little different question for you, Erin.
Okay.
Because you told me a funny story before this event began. And so as a leader, being focused and motivated in achieving long-term goals is all about grit. And Angela Duckworth has shared the importance of this underrated leadership trait in her recent book and TED Talk. So how have you used grit and passion to pick yourself up in the face of adversity?
Well, I do love the grit question, because it opens up to these provocative stories that we can tell, which is kind of what I'm going to do right now. So get ready. So I just had my 2018 performance evaluation, which we all look forward to, and we heard, it's important to be able to take that feedback and to grow from it. But one of the words in the areas of opportunity for improvement for me was bossy. And I'm a 37-year-old woman, and I had bossy in my performance evaluation. So you're taken back, right? Because bossy doesn't really feel good. And I saw this those hands in the audience come up for how many men we have here, I would wager to bet not many of them have ever had the word bossy put on their performance review. That's kind of reserved for ladies, right? And it doesn't feel great, right? It feels like I don't want to speak up, or creates this idea that maybe I don't have the desire to lead in some way. And you can tell I've stewed about that word. And I'm coming back, and I work with my executive coach, and we've talked about reframing. And that's where I think grit comes in, is the ability to take that kind of feedback, understand the spirit in which it was given, and what am I going to do differently so that bossy doesn't show up on my evaluation again, and to reframe, what does that mean for me, and what am I going to go out and do with it, and what will I change in 2019? So for me, I likely need to be on more of a listening tour and less of a talking tour in 2019. But you've got to come to that realization that there are areas of improvement, and that's where I think real grit comes in, because when it's all high fives, that's the easy stuff. Right. When you're getting that direct feedback that doesn't always feel great is when you've really got to get into that grit piece of the personality.
Thank you. Anyone else? Phyllis, what about you?
I think grit translates again into, when we talked about the adversity or the challenges in front of you, that grit is how do you approach that? Do you run from it, or do you reach down deep inside and figure out and develop a strategy to overcome it? It's easier to retreat than it is to work through it. So I encourage you, anytime it gets challenging, you're not sure you can do it, the anxiety or the fear, get your grit, work through it, because the reward on the other side is well worth it.
And I would ask, how many of you have read, question, Grit by Angela Duckworth? For those of you that haven't, I recommend either watching her TED Talk or reading the book. It is a really good book. And the concept of grit is not new, but it's about perseverance. And for those of you that read the book, she mentions West Point, which is a rival of my school, the Air Force Academy. I'm just kidding. All the service academies are wonderful. But you don't have to be at West Point or at the Air Force Academy to have grit. You can have grit at any university. You don't have to go to college to have grit. Anyone can have grit. And so that is a concept that I want to impart to you, that we all have grit. And then one of my mentors, he's about to retire at the Air Force Academy, we talk about leadership. And there's sort of potential leadership and kinetic leadership. So similar to physics. We read these books, we listen to these lectures, we have all this knowledge. Do we impart that? Do we have impact with our knowledge? Are we making our leadership kinetic? And so that's something I want you to think about, perhaps for the rest of today or this weekend. How are you leveraging your potential leadership? And use that grit and perseverance to help others. And so one thing to add on the STEM side is that we've started drone scholarships for students pursuing degrees towards careers in unmanned systems. And it doesn't have to be STEM only. You can have it in design or communications, because if you can't tell your story, then people are unlikely to buy your product. But I invite you to read that book as well.
Thank you. Well, we've got one more question for you, and it's and I think a very important one. And basically, what's that one piece of advice that you would give young professional ladies and even men, but young professionals starting out in their careers in today's environment? Why don't we start with you, Phyllis?
In today's environment, I think there's so much opportunity out there for all young people, and women included. But you need to have a sense of where you're going and what you want to do. Know what is it that you're striving to become, and then lay out your plan to help yourself get there. Find the people that you can emulate, that can mentor you. Surround yourself with people that will support you. We live in a world today with technology that people are so quick, which can be such a positive tool, but they're quick to use it in a negative way. You've got to filter that out of your life, keep focused on what you want to achieve, and use those around you to help get you there. Dr. Simmons, you talking about those that held you the most accountable and were the most honest with you, that's what you need in your life. I can remember to this day my 5th grade history teacher that gave me that 89 on that report card. I didn't earn that 90, but it burns me still today that I didn't work hard enough to get that 90 on that report card. But it's those people, again, that made a difference in my life because they knew what I was capable of achieving and didn't let me fall short of it. So surround yourself with really positive people and find those mentors. They're there.
Very good. Diane.
I agree. And I agree with everything you're saying, and I would say to add to that, I do want to reiterate that asking for help is not a sign of weakness. Asking for help is a sign of strength. So surround yourself with those people. And going back to the confidence side, I think we've all dealt with confidence issues of some level. And to me, I try and boil it down to, okay, how can I act, or how can I move towards action? And when I look at that, you sort of weigh confidence, competence. So when your confidence is high, you're likely competent in that area. And where confidence is low, we may be lacking in competence in that area. And so assess where you're lacking your confidence, and then come up with an action plan of where you want to be, what do you need to do to get there. And so whether it's watching YouTube lectures or podcasts or whatever else, you can do that. I listen to between 5 and 10 a day, and I listen to YouTube at 2.0 and podcast 3.0 because who has the time?
Right.
But I do advise just something, look at the confidence gap, if there is one. Find yourself mentors, and again, look where you want to go and take those next steps to get there. Find that focused and altruism to serve others. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen.
Sure, my advice has to do with finding your authentic self and then really utilizing that as you rise to the top, as you're working through that career ladder. These degrees and these certifications, I saw my name up there with all those letters, and I was like, oh, that's a little embarrassing. But those are the things that we have to do to get that first interview, to get your foot in the door, to have those conversations. But where you're really going to rise is when you start making those connections with people, because you're authentic and you're highlighting what's so innately unique to each one of us. And it's about these interpersonal relationships and these connections that you make, not so much that we're able to say, yes, I got that degree and that certification. That's just the base level piece of it. When you really start to rise, it's about, are you authentic, are you sincere, and are you making those connections?
Thank you. Well, thank you, ladies, for coming up here and telling us a little bit about your story. Can we all give them just a round of applause?